Chapter 18 The Wandering World. I never thought I'd see one. I didn't think they were real. But the deep is big, and so are the things that live in it. Bina Linnick, Spacer, year 32,995,730. The doors shut with a clang, and the sharp snap of bolts locking into place. Magnus stood in the windowless room. It was dark, save for the angled slats in the ceiling that focused the light onto the single figure in the center of the room, her arms wrapped in chains while the purple tube dripped poison into her veins. Jezebel's head was leaning to the side. Her eyes were unfocused and empty. Magnus was cast in shadow. The only light in the room was on Jezebel. He said nothing, walking around her until he stood behind her. It would be several hours still until the crew recovered from their mental adventures. He placed his index fingers on her temples and closed his eyes. Now, there's something in that pretty head of yours that I need. You took it, said Jezebel hoarsely. Everything. I'm nothing. I'll kill you. Alas, said Magnus, it was not I who took it. He moved his fingers into a new position. Who is the girl? You really buried it, didn't you? It won't do you any good. Oh, maybe I spoke too soon. Every muscle in Jezebel's body spasmed, and blood began to leak from her ears and her nose. One of Magnus's fingers traced her head from her temple to just behind her right ear. Is that it? He said, leaning forwards. Let's see. Jezebel's arm snapped up so fast that there was an awful crunch, and she let out a low groan. Oops. Too low, said Magnus. How could I have been so blind, groaned Jezebel, to not see that it was... Magnus raised his finger higher and pressed it down again. Jezebel seized, her mouth gaping. The smell of burnt hair filled the room, and then Magnus raised his finger. Jezebel collapsed back into the chains hanging forwards. There was a tiny speck of light that raised from her scalp. It hovered above Magnus's finger, and he smiled. With a flourish of his wrist, it was gone. He strode across the chamber, pausing in front of the door. He didn't turn around. The bolts unlocked and the door opened, framing the silhouette of Magnus in the doorway. The door boomed shut. Flashes of distant worlds, of the colorless desert, of sudden carnage and burning cities. Legions lowered their knees to her, and she felt every one of them as if they were an extension of herself. Sule spread through the stars, across planets, and there was only one that could hope to stop her. Then she was blind. Do you remember your name? Said the woman. No, Sule replied, but her voice was different. It was a man's voice. It was Samuel's voice. That's all right, said the woman. I can give you back your name. Your name is Samuel, and you and I, Samuel, said the woman, are going to do so much together. You will be my sword. You will be my truth. Pain, flashes of red lightning. She was standing above a man with a gray beard. He was in armor, strong but defeated, filthy and blood-streaked, and she leveled her sword below his chin. What are you? He said. Floating on an ocean, and along the shore were thousands of silent figures, men, women, children, all watching her with blank expressions. Something moved beneath her, brushing her legs beneath the water. Then it slithered into her mind, and she saw a devouring snake. The serpent turned its eyes to hers, and its words burned through her mind. The Uzgaracht spoke. Sule sat up with a gasp, her fists clenched, a cold sweat coating her skin. Easy there, said Reginald. Sule sighed. It had worked. Unless it hadn't. She flung herself out of the cot in panic, bed sheets flying as she rushed to the corner of the room, where she crouched down, raising her hands, ready to throw a lightning bolt at the thing that was pretending to be Reginald. "Are you real?" she shouted across the room. "Sule, it's okay." Ben rushed into view, waving his arms. "We found you on the deck unconscious. It's been 2 days. We're out. We're safe." "Ben," Sule started, but then she slid down the wall, clutching her knees. But you're a snake." "I'm a what?" he asked. "Did you say I'm a snake?" Sue looked up at him and then stood and reached out and poked him with her index finger. Then he broke down laughing. "No scales," she whispered. Then he threw his arms around her. Sue wasn't sure how to react. Nobody ever hugged her, so by the time she'd started to raise her arms, he'd already pulled away. "It was that place," Reginald said. "It made us all mad." "Where are we?" asked Sue. "Is everyone—" "Come outside and look," said Ben. "I've never seen anything like it, and everyone is fine." Then he paused. "Well, almost everyone." "What's wrong with her?" asked John, squinting at Jezebel. "Beats me," said Felix, watching the drool dripping from Jezebel's mouth. "Probably too much of the Alcure's cocktail." "It wasn't the amber jade," said Magnus darkly. "This was something else, something intentional. Maybe she did it to herself. Maybe she's faking it. Nobody would do this to themselves." Sule watched the woman, trying to disguise her horror as interest. Jezebel looked dead, her skin a pallid gray, sitting there with that awful blank expression. "Think she'll get better?" "No," said Magnus. "She's gone. Just a shell now. A mind with no soul, a zombie." "What do you mean?" "Someone's stolen her life." "What kind of monster could do that?" said Enar. "The one standing right next to you," thought Sule. "The monster we were in," said Reginald. "But why her, not us?" A memory flashed into Sule's mind of her on all fours, making her way to the deck, her fingers like talons, her body an inhuman flicker of shadow, her eyes in the reflection of a mirror, flashing silver discs in the lamplight, like Yorick when he'd killed Ansel. That awful grin of hers. She turned away and shuddered. "Is she still a threat?" asked Reginald. "Who can say?" "Is she listening?" "She's a god," said Magnus. "Even without a reason to exist, she'll be a threat." "And then how can someone steal a god's life when it's infinite?" "Any minor god is simply an Alcure who has discovered the secret to immortality. As far as I'm aware, the 9 are no different. Otherwise, this little job of mine would never have worked if they were anything more." "If that's true, then any of the gods can be killed," said Reginald. "So why haven't they?" "One of the great mysteries," said Magnus. "I've heard that to truly kill a god, nothing can remain, not even the blood. Or they'll find a new body. Soul jumping, it's called." "Soul jumping," thought Sule, and she blanched. Can any Alcure soul jump?" "Perhaps," said Samuel. "Is that what happened here?" said Reginald with alarm. "No. What happened here is probably the cruelest way. See here." He lowered the collar of Jezebel's shirt and traced the dark burns on her skin. They were about the size of Sule's fingers. "Something did this." "So it wasn't the monster, the Usgaracht?" asked John. Magnus turned and looked directly at Sule, who stiffened, her hair standing on end. He could out her now if he wanted. Instead, Magnus stood and shrugged. "Anything could have happened while we were under the Usgaracht's influence. One thing is true, only a creature with extremely powerful alchemy could have done this. Another god, perhaps. Maybe some kind of demon got aboard the ship. Maybe it was hungry and Jezebel was simply the brightest light. He chuckled. It doesn't seem right to leave her here, said Sule. Can we get her a new soul? Sule shook her head, realizing how foolish that sounded. Why help her? Asked Felix wearily. Remember, it's not a she, it's a monster. Gods can look like anything. Their skin is only a camouflage. What do we do with her? Said Ben. Keep her here for now, said Magnus. She won't last much longer. Zombies never do. That night at dinner, Sule hardly touched her food. She tried to think back to what had happened during the gaps in her memory. Whenever she did, she could only envision her eyes and the intoxicating sense of power, and her delight in it. She shivered. The next several days she spent most of her free time helping fix the ship. The fleshy growths she'd seen inside the maw were unfortunately not a hallucination, and had grown throughout the hole where the Sophie had breached herself. They stank just as badly as they had inside the Oozgaracht. Even worse now, as they were half melted to slime and oozed through the cracks. They gathered it in buckets and threw it over the edge, their faces covered in rags, saturated by perfume. The holes they had mostly patched with the spare durwood from the hold. Sule spread the last of the liquid seal across the hull, and watched as the fibers knitted themselves together, becoming a hardly noticeable seam that was flush with the wood. Chorsk turned the wheel. The deep was filled with spiraling mountains of shipwrecks. The dozen or so navigational instruments spun in circles and rocked up and down on their own accord. Their transition to the realm known as Shardigan's Heap was not sudden. A yellow gas had gradually become denser until it flowed like a thick soup around the Sophie. The scent of salt was replaced by the aroma of sulfur, and Sule sniffed the air again. Cheese? What is it? Asked Ben. Nothing, said Sule. She didn't want to explain why she could smell as well as she did. Maybe her mother was actually a Stevenarium broodhound. That was probably why Ansel never wanted to talk about her. Magnus pulled a snow globe-shaped contraption from his coat pocket, setting it on the control console in front of the wheel. He tapped it once. A small spark leapt from his finger and hopped around erratically inside the glass ball until it stretched, organizing itself into a straight line. The line moved about lazily, pointing outwards into the soup. How many of those things do you have in your pockets? Asked Sule. This is the last one, said Magnus. He turned to Reginald. Follow the direction of the arrow. If it bends, there is an object blocking our path. Navigate around it until the path corrects itself. It will lead us to the revisionists. I've heard stories about this place, said Felix. Something lives here. Something big. Something bigger than any great ship. The wandering world, said Ben in a hushed voice. The perfect place for monsters, Captain, said Jun, crossing her arms. We'll never see them coming. You know of anything dwelling out there that would do us harm? Reginald asked Magnus. There are the Falbog, said Magnus. Tens of thousands of years. That's how long the Empire has been trying to wipe them out. They were far in advance of any technology belonging to the houses, but they were too few in number. In the end, all of those that remained had fled to the heap. The Empire has tried hundreds of times to wipe them out. Every time they fail miserably. Any species Grail can control, he destroys. The Falbug are a myth, Felix interjected. They're real, said Magnus. All of the horrors are real, said Rowan, forcing her words out between clenched teeth. It's a wasteland. Rowan hadn't said a word since Sule had come topwise. But the Oozgaracht must have shocked the woman back to the present, and now Rowan was watching Magnus quietly with a burning intensity. Sule saw Jun put a hand over a gun and give Rowan the eye. Shardigan's Heap, sneered Rowan. You know they named it after the first explorer to find it. Only 10 of the 100 crew came back. They teach about it in academy, because nobody had ever seen anything like the venom that had killed them. Flesh melting off their bones as they screamed for the Falbog. Trust me, interrupted Magnus. I've been here once before. They won't attack without reason. The Sophie flew on, and often the line of Magnus's Alcuric compass would bend and tilt, and Reginald would throw the wheel left or right, and Sule would watch it spin. She would catch glimpses of things through the soup, the silhouette of a peculiar-shaped wreck, a spiked shadow that looked like a sea anemone, and what might have been a village, connected together by a spiderweb of walkways. But in the next moment the soup would swallow them up, and the canvas would be a blank wall again. The compass line bent. The Alcuric sprites inside danced up. Reginald cursed and the Sophie tilted, her inner mechanisms of gears clicking as sails unfurled and refurled. The foretold object appeared as a ship from the mist in front of them, its needle nose so close that it nearly impaled them. Imperial crests were clearly emblazoned across its hull. Reginald cursed again. Sule thought for sure it was one of the ships that had followed them into the cause stream, but it was clear after a moment there were signs of age and decay. The ship's deck was empty, and while the lights were on in the cabins, there was no discernible movement. They coasted past, watching through the side with a kind of grim fascination. There were no signs of violence, nothing to hint at what had happened to the crew. After a moment, the ghost ship was swallowed by the gas. It was some time before anyone spoke again. There was a sense of urgency, of dread at the realization that the soupy fog harbored something unknowably terrible. They continued, second-guessing shadows and shapes that moved in the fog. Sule had begun to doubt her senses. She was helping Ben on the deck with a tangled line when a shape soared over the Sophie, casting a sizable shadow. "Did you see that?" exclaimed Ben. He ran to the back railing and peered out. Sule wasn't looking. She was staring forwards at the thing gliding towards them from the bow. It looked like a cross between a Jadelian bat and a raven as it emerged from the mist, long trails of torn fabric trailing in its wake. "The Falbog," Sule whispered. "Stay calm," called Reginald, but Sule could see he was gripping the butt of his gun. The Falbog beat its wings as it entered the Sophie's gravity. It was huge. It settled with a whomp and a rustle on the deck. The tattered fabric seemed to grow from the creature. It was just as much a part of the thing as its wings. "Oh, wow," said Ben. "We don't mean any harm," called Reginald. "We come in peace." The Falbog wrapped its wings around itself like a cloak and stood tall. It was beautiful, in a mysteriously horrifying kind of way. Its eyes were mirrored and red as it lowered its head to stare at her. More of its kind swooped around the ship, landing silently to perch on every surface, until they were completely surrounded by a wall of bodies. Magnus emerged then from the stairwell, striding across the deck to stand beside Sule. The Falbog shifted, its leathery wings shivering as it turned its unblinking gaze to the Alcuor. It let out a sound that was like the exhale of an old man. Its voice followed, as though it was just a memory of what the Falbog had said and not what it was saying. It was deep and clear, and yet Sule found it difficult to remember how it had actually sounded the moment after it stopped. "You," sighed the Falbog in common, "we told you never to return." "I've not forgotten," said Magnus, "but I've brought your death. Will be swift," sighed the Falbog. "It will be long and agonizing." Now, said Magnus, "let's not get ahead of ourselves here." "They know you all right," said Ben. "Real well," said Jun. The Falbog unfolded its great wings with a great whoomph, which spread so wide as to cover the deck to either side. "I've brought you the one they call the Jewel Vasadak," Magnus yelled, cringing away. She's sedated. We're bringing her to Ove. The Falbog dug the talons at the tips of its wings into the deck, drawing its long neck forwards until its face was directly in front of Magnus. You lie, it sighed. Yes, cried Magnus, but not about this. Allow me. He stepped away and then disappeared for a moment inside the stairwell, and then emerged a moment later dragging Jezebel. He laid her out before the Falbog, which stepped back with a hiss. It cannot be, sighed the Falbog, and it drew close to Jezebel's unmoving body. Then it recoiled. Sadis, said the Falbog, and the Falbog perched along the Sophie's deck began to sigh with agitation. Joel Vasadak. Will you let us pass? Asked Magnus. There is deceit, sighed the Falbog. The vessel is empty. It is vrijskracht. Truth, said Magnus. And lies, and a bigger game at play. I know you know Ove wants to speak to us, and I wouldn't risk my life. This could be your Freyr Oas. Let us pass. Their freedom, thought Sule, as Samuel twisted the words into meaning. We should kill it now, said the other Falbog in their sighing language. The risk is too great. Ove decides the risks. It demands to see the newcomers. The Falbog looked down at Magnus, who held its gaze. There was a silent exchange of expression, and the air grew tense. Then the Falbog screeched, letting loose a cry that rattled the windows. It dived towards Magnus. Then just before it reached him, it leapt, its wings extending. It swept upwards, flapping in huge strokes as it dived from the ship, coasting away to join its comrades in the circling horde. Magnus wore a small smile as he looked at Sule and winked. Let's go. Follow the leader. He waved his hand in a circle above his head. What in the seven is an oath? Said Reginald. The Falbogs screamed in their alien sighs as they began to fly in front of the Sophie, and Reginald obliged them. The Sophie's sails extended, and they continued deeper into Shardigan's heap. Sule stayed on the deck with Magnus. The Falbog were all around them, their wings flapping in leathery harmony. They're scared of you, said Sule to Magnus. Why? A story for another time, Magnus said quietly, then more loudly so everyone could hear. I put my life in your hands. Rowan watched Magnus from the pilot house, and Magnus swallowed. Look! Ben whistled through his fingers, pointing ahead. The soupy fog was thinning, and then it was gone, and they were rising above it. A shape began to emerge before the Sophie. Sule thought that the Rose had been the largest structure she would ever see, but that seemed small in comparison to what lay before them now. It was roughly spherical, dotted with windows and covered by a forest of colossal masts that looked akin to the way hair might cover a spider. With shock, she realized it wasn't a planet or an immobile station, but a grand ship, one the size of a planet, or nearly so, a planet ship. The wandering world, whispered Reginald. The legends were true. The Falbog led them closer, weaving through the planet ship's masts, guiding them towards an open space in one of the ridges splitting the hull. There were people, Sule realized, walking about, moving behind the portals on its surface. The Falbog dispersed, leaving the Sophie to coast in alone. The hangar was empty and quiet. The mainsails furled. The Sophie remained drifting an arm's length above the hangar floor as the door slowly shut behind them. Where is everyone? Asked Sule. Then there was a hiss, and a white cloud of gas began to fill the hangar. Damn, said Jun. Chapter 19. To Swim in a Star. I've never seen so many ships. It was like a dust cloud obscuring its light. We emptied the holds of munitions, firing for days. By the end, the beast's flesh was in tatters. I had started to doubt it could be done, but when its light faded, I could feel hope again. Wilbur Lovell, Imperial Deck Gunner, year 40,999,032. The room was a circular chamber of dull gray metal. Sule blinked and tried to raise her arms, but found that she could not. They appeared to be shackled to the chair she was sitting in, a chair that was welded to the floor in the room's center. Before she could properly determine her predicament, the door opened and a slim man dressed in a leather jerkin entered. He was carrying a folder and the door closed behind him. Then he sat at the other end of the desk across from her. He cleared his throat. We will now administer a series of tests, he said. If you pass, we will continue the conversation. There was a hum, and Sule found that her attention was drawn to the circling pattern inscribed on the floor around them. Is that a ward? She shot at Samuel. It is similar, said Samuel, but is unlike any that I have ever seen. This feeling, though. Sule shifted uncomfortably as the circle's hum grew louder, and her skin began to crawl. She looked across the table at the man, who was gazing at her intently. What is this? Sule thought in a rising panic. What are they doing to me? Ah, I recall. It appears to be an Eladrian spiral, but created by a machine, a technology unknown to me, and not by an Alcuer's hands, said Samuel. It is used as a torture device for those gifted with control. A normal creature would only feel a slight pressure. An Alcuer will feel an indescribable agony. Whatever you do, you must not react, no matter how painful it becomes. Sule gritted her teeth as the room began to tilt. An unbearable light seemed to build all around her. Her skin itched and her mouth became dry. The tiniest movement of skin against the fabric of her clothes felt like the inside had grown sewing needles. The strands seemed to pull taut, then rebound, and it would repeat. She felt like she was filling with water and was about to explode. She gripped the ends of the chair and held back a scream as the sensation became unbearable. Her captor leaned forwards, his eyes watching a bead of sweat roll down her forehead. I will shield your mind, as I did for you before. Then the feeling was gone. All the feelings were gone. It was locked away in another room in her head, and that part of her was still screaming, becoming monstrous, clawing with teeth at her restraints, tearing flesh to bone and digging at the walls until they were covered in blood. I'm thirsty, said Sule. Her captor sat back in his chair, looking disappointed and yet perhaps a bit relieved. Tell me about how you came to possess one of the 9, said the man, and tell me about how you know of the Alcuer who calls himself Magnus Rushel. Sule was led inside a cylindrical chamber, following her interrogator as the door closed behind them. Her wrists remained shackled and they were flanked on either side by a trio of soldiers. The corridor rocked gently, and sluggish flashes of light began to drift past behind them. There was a band of light on the other side of the chamber. There was a staircase attached above the door, running horizontally across the room. It looked like an art piece, not something that served any practical purpose. The light moved faster and faster on one wall, and on the other she could begin to distinguish individual lights as it slowed. Sule felt her sense of up shifting. Her guide was leaning forwards, and then he and the other soldiers stepped onto the wall that held the door they entered through. We call this the transition bulkhead, said the man. The inner core of the Ove rotates to maintain gravity. Generating it by burning sap would be far too expensive. Maybe the Empire can afford such things, but we certainly cannot. Follow me, or fall to me. Sule stepped onto the wall, and the guide began to walk up the spiral staircase. She followed him cautiously. The room rocked. The sound of clamps locking resonated through the chamber. Above them, the door opened, and there was a rush of hot air. Sule blinked away the light as her eyes adjusted. Then she stared in astonishment. The ship was hollow, and the interior surface was covered by buildings, trees, and a city lay in the distance. They were wrapped around in a band of green land that encircled the core. The core was supported by columns that emerged from seemingly random points around the shell, coming together to form around the metal sphere at its center. Light shone through the vast windows on its sides, illuminating segments of the shell as it, almost imperceptibly, spun. "What is that?" asked Sule. "At its heart is Ove, a living sun." "You've imprisoned a sun?" said Sule with a touch of awe. "We would never imprison such a creature," said her captor, guiding her down a path through an open field. "Ove built the chamber and the inner vessel to house itself, so that it could contain its heat, so that others could draw near, so that Ove could speak to them, and know life other than itself and its own kind. The shell came later." "Does it speak?" asked Sule. "It has a voice, but it only talks to a few, and it's been very quiet for the last few decades. It controls the shell, the core, every door, every sail. It's all Ove." "So the people built the shell around Ove and gave it sails. So it's like its legs?" asked Sule. Her captor evidently decided he'd said too much, because he remained silent. So the sun is the ship. The ship is alive, and then is Ove a revisionist?" asked Sule. No answer. "Where are you taking me?" "Stop talking," said one of the soldiers. They entered a small town. The buildings were densely packed but cozy, with tall windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. High above, workers scaled one of the pylons, the clamor of their tools a distant clang. In ambience, the bang on metal reminded Sule of an ocean buoy near the small sea to the east of Dendold. Sule was marched down a cobblestone road, curious faces turning to watch them pass. Before long, she found herself standing before a tower of modest size, surrounded by a high wall somewhere in the center of town. Past another circular metal door and a contingent of guards, they entered a courtyard filled with plants and small babbling pools that ran with crystal clear water. Sule could see fish swimming below the surface, where green weeds swayed back and forth in the slow current. "Aren't suns creatures of Valkyrie?" Sule heard Reginald's voice, and she breathed a sigh of relief. "Why would revisionists entrust themselves to one?" "It could kill us all in a moment if it wanted to," said Felix. "But it doesn't, and it hasn't for thousands of years if this place is anything to go by. Better to trust at some point." "A true warrior does not fight an enemy too weak to defend itself," said Einar. "Perhaps this sun god is honorable. A worthy opponent." "Leave it to Einar," said Ben, dueling a star. Sule coughed as she stepped inside the building, and all the heads turned to her. "Sule!" It was John who rushed forwards to her this time, before turning to the interrogator with suspicion, drawing Sule away to the side. "What do you want?" snapped John. "What have you done with Magnus?" asked Reginald. "The Alcuor will be tried for his crimes against nature," said the interrogator. "His fate will be decided by the tribunal. You will not see him again." "And the god?" "In a fortnight we will execute Jezebel Adara, as by some miracle that is what she is. Our scientists have confirmed it. All revisionists may attend, for the word was spread throughout known space. They gather even now." The man gestured around them. "You may stay here, a gratitude while the general decides what to do with you. Your tale needs extensive verification. Any attempt to leave will be viewed as a hostile act and will be dealt with appropriately. We cannot yet be sure you are not Grail's spies." Then he was gone, and they were left alone, ignoring the guards standing around in the courtyard. What in the seven hills is a scientist? I don't know, and I don't like this one bit, said Reginald. They're speaking to us like we're the enemy, and we just brought them the golden goose. They must think it's a trap, Captain, said John. Us bringing a god here of all places. Never trust an Alcuor, said Reginald. He prodded a puffy chair and sat, sinking into it with a sigh. How did they figure it out? Him being an Alcuor. He turned to Rowan, but she was already shaking her head. I'm many things, but I'm no vacant rat, growled Rowan, glowering at Reginald. Even for something like him. They had a test, said Sule. Some kind of device to see if he was an Alcuor. Think about... What? How would you know that? Oh. How would you know that? Said Rowan, watching Sule suspiciously. Think about it. Look at this place. The tools they have. It's nothing like anywhere else, right? These scientists of theirs, said Chorsk. Maybe they can have a way to tell. Could they be Alcuors too? Then we must find these scientists, said Enar, the grey folds of his eyes squinting as he watched their guards, and slay them. I think what we need, said Reginald, is some rest. Sule watched a bird land in a tree as she sat next to the pool. A gentle breeze rustled the branches, and legless froglings made their gentle gurk, gurk beneath the lily pads. Sule brushed her hand back and forth in the water and watched the fish lazily drift around her fingertips. She felt clear-headed in this place. The weight on her head she'd felt on the rose was noticeably absent here. Enar sat down next to her, staring intensely into her face. She stared back with wide eyes. You look sad, said Enar. The words came as a surprise. Sule opened her mouth to reply and then closed it again. She didn't feel sad. She felt the same way she always did. A bit distant, maybe, but sad. Sorry, she said. You have been sad since I first saw you, said Enar. But now it is worse. Started Sule. I don't feel sad. You have a warrior's mind, said Enar, but not a warrior's heart. He touched her chest and then his own. You need connection, he said, to find family. I, too, yearn for this. It is my dishonor that I lost what I had. Family must be earned through struggle and death. Sule thought about this for a few moments, and she came to the realization that she wasn't as in control as she thought. Was it so bad that she could no longer sense what she was feeling? Was Samuel the one pushing it away? Or was it her? She thought back to the line of people she had met over the past few months. John, the mother, Reginald, the hidden grief, Samuel, the mentor, Magnus, the confidence, the crew, the family, and Enar, the simple truth that nobody else would tell her. It all fit together in a way where everyone was telling her what she needed to know when she needed to know it. Sule lay in her bed, a real bed, not a hammock. Sleep still eluded her, and she pushed back the covers to pace back and forth. What are you thinking? Said Samuel. You know what I'm thinking, thought Sule. Sule didn't know what she was thinking, or she did, and she didn't want to think about what she was thinking. Her mind was a chaotic jumble of self-doubt and the images of all the different ways she could make it stop. Abruptly, forever. You should go for a walk, said Samuel. It will clear your head. Shut up, said Sule. You aren't real. You don't know me, not really. You can't understand. I was real once, or part of me was. Sule wanted to tear Samuel from her head and throw him out the window, but she couldn't. She growled in frustration, looking around the cramped room for something to hit. She ended up settling for a table, cursing as she did, and then she pushed it to the corner of the room, sitting underneath it, and she choked back a sob, and then began to cry like a little girl. The walls that she had put up when Ansel had died were overflowing. The emotions of the other side were leaking, threatening to overwhelm her. No matter how hard she tried to get things right, to do the right thing, she failed. Someone would get hurt. Someone would die. Something would go wrong. Then someone would die. She knew she could fix it, or maybe she just thought she did. She couldn't trust herself. She had to second guess herself. The universe was against her. What had she ever done to the world to deserve this life? What was happening to her? Why her? Was fairness even real? It would have been better if she'd never been born. She'd lived for 17 years. That was something, an achievement. But what was the greatest achievement even worth? In the end, she'd die anyway. In enough time, nobody would remember her. The walls rumbled gently. Sule ignored it. It's not that bad, she told herself. Other people have it worse. She covered her head in her jacket and sat beneath it, unmoving. You're pathetic, she said to herself. The walls rumbled again. Sule peeked out from beneath her coat, her bleary eyes emerging like a tortoise from its shell. The walls seemed to hum, and she thought it could not be in her imagination, unless she actually was losing her mind, which did not seem at all far-fetched at this point. Who is... Sule stopped herself. She knew who it was. She turned her gaze to the window, to the gray-black sphere in the sky. The night side was facing them now, slightly brighter than a full moon, and cast the interior in a white-hued twilight. What do you want? Whispered Sule to the empty room. Ove did not reply with words, but the door to her room clicked open. Sule hesitated, then wiped the streaks of tear from her face and stood, peeking out the door through the crack. The lanterns lightened and darkened down the corridor, beckoning her to follow. She went back and grabbed her jacket, leaving her shoes behind, and tiptoed her way down the corridor and out the window, scaling the wall along a drain pipe. She followed the dimming lights out through the courtyard, past a room with raucous laughing, the light spilling out onto the grass, down through to the wall. A gate opened for her. She found herself on a quiet road. A woman was walking away from her. At the other end of the street, a lamplight dimmed, and then after a moment it brightened, and one further down the street another faintly flickered. Sule followed the trail of dimming lights until she found herself outside the town, standing in a field of grain stalks. Before her rose one of the colossal pylons, stretching into the sky, holding up the sphere that contained Ove. You want me to come to you? Asked Sule. You know, I don't have the best track record when it comes to following strange voices in the dark. A door opened at the base of the pylon, spilling a warm light across the field. Sule shrugged. Maybe you should tell the others, said Samuel. If it wanted to hurt me, I'm already in its belly if you think about it, said Sule. And even if it does kill me, would that be such a bad thing, all things considered? I think it would be a bad thing, said Samuel. I don't know why you're being so nice, said Sule, as she stepped through the door into the pylon. We're in this together. There is no me without you. You were the one who brought me back to life, and I'm going to use that life how I want to use it. And right now, I want to see where these stairs go. Sule climbed a curling staircase until she reached a platform. If she looked up, the staircase looked like it climbed into infinity. But after a few more twists, she found something waiting for her. It was an elevator like the ones at the Rose, but this one was shaped like an egg. The door was open. Sule stepped inside, sitting on one of the cushioned benches that lined the wall. The glass door shut behind her. There was a rumble as the elevator started to ascend up towards the sphere. The ribs of the pylon flashed by with increasing speed, and Sule felt herself sink into the cushion as the capsule accelerated. The sun knows what I am, thought Sule, like Jezebel knew. I can teach you to hide it, said Samuel. your smell and your shine. The capsule slowed to a stop and the doors opened with a pop and a hiss. I'd rather you just teach me how to smell myself, said Sule. She stepped out of the egg. Maybe I smell really good, but how would I know? There were no walls, and the floor sloped off into the horizon. At some point, the capsule elevator must have flipped, because she was standing on what had been the ceiling. She realized that she was standing on the shell of the core. From this perspective, it looked like an expansive dome. There was a large circular door at her feet, and she could see nothing else from horizon to horizon. Sule felt a twinge of fear. Through the viewport, there flashed a beam of light. It flickered violently, becoming brighter and then dimming in blinding flashes. The entire floor was humming with barely contained energy. She could feel her body soaking it up through her feet, warming her legs and filling her with a mad light. You already know what I think about this, said Samuel, but you aren't going to listen to me, are you? Nope, said Sule. Are you afraid? You weren't afraid of the Uzgaracht. Why would you be afraid of a sun? The handle of the door began to spin on its own accord, and the vibrating clicks of unlocking mechanisms vibrated through Sule's feet. There was a final click, and the portal opened, engulfing her in Ove's unfiltered light. The world was white, and then it was fire. There was a constant roar, deafening at first before her ears adjusted. All around her was power. It was difficult to describe it as anything else. There were currents of churning plasma, rolling like lava. Alchuric currents arced and crackled, building and bursting all at once. She knew it should have been tearing her apart, vaporizing her in an instant, and yet she floated in a bubble of calm. The brutality all around her was muted, the truth tempered behind an invisible barrier. Sule felt the fire, and it was slippery, but not wet, and the consistency of jello. You will not be harmed, the fire spoke. The voice resonated in Sule's bones, and it was the voice of neither a man nor a woman. It was how Sule imagined an angel would sound. I mean you no harm as well, said Sule. You are Ove? I am, said the voice. Why did you bring me here? You shine brightly, little godling, said Ove, like an infant's sun. And I smell, thought Sule. You think I'm a god? Is that not the term for a being with ability beyond the majority? Sule hesitated. I don't know. I always thought they were more than that. I'm no god. Perhaps it is the other. The other? The one you wear within your flesh. Samuel. It is ancient, as old as a sun and powerful. I see it clearly now. It alone has its power, contained, hidden, a potential. A weapon of old. You have your threads intertwined but separate. You are not the stain. Careful, little godling. What does it mean by stain, thought Sule. A weapon? I don't know, said Samuel. I think this sun god has lost its flame. Threads, stains. Next it will talk about little men that live in your ears. Sule felt a hideous rage towards Ove, one that was not her own. Silence! Boomed Ove. Suddenly Sule could no longer feel Samuel, only a gaping void where he had been. She would have fallen from the shock had she not been floating. There have been many powers in my domain, continued Ove. Few have been as bright as you. When your thread is long, you will be as bright as I. There are others that come and go. I watch them. I see their glow. I see when it is extinguished, as I see now that you are fresh to the world and do not mean my inhabitants harm. I will not keep you. There was a pause, and the roar of Sule's surroundings returned. She acutely felt the absence of Samuel's constant whisperings, but she got the sense he was still there, only hiding. "Wait, what's it like?" Sule blurted out. "What's it like being you? How do you see? Do you see?" "I am many, and I am one," said Ove. "I see the threads as they form a tapestry. Its image I feel, and it is music in intonation. Time, as you know, is a painting of states." "So you are an Alcuer," said Sule. "You feel the strand and listen to the music." "Analogy," said Ove. "It is better to see." The color of the glow around Sule changed, shifting from yellow to orange to red and then to black. She found herself floating in complete darkness. The roar was gone. Sule stepped forwards, and the darkness at her feet rippled and glinted like she was walking on an infinite lake. "I see as you see, light and music and the fabric of all that is." The space evoked a sense of calm, utterly complete. There was something there, a figure, hunched over. She moved closer and saw that he was not entirely a man, but something in the shape of a man with antlers and a crown of bone. His head was hollow, bones curved upwards into branches like a tree, and she could see that he had a mouth, but no eyes. She stood above him for a moment, watching him. There was something oddly terrifying about him. He did not move. He did not so much as turn his head. She walked past the man shape and did not turn to look behind her. With each step that she took, her perspective shifted until she was looking at her own back. She turned to the side and saw reflections of herself spreading into infinity in a long line, and they all turned to look at her as she turned the other way. Yet her perspective did not change, even as she knew her eyes looked into the dark. Now it was like they were different people, all watching her. "Entropy is a return to the beginning. To travel forward or back, one must travel all the same. I exist, therefore I am, all as I ever was." Then the nearest doppelganger's eyes shifted, and she looked directly into Sule's eyes. "Hey me," said Sule to Sule. Sule stared at herself, and she stared back. Did she really look like that? The version of herself here smiled at her confidently. She glowed with the self-assurance that made her feel. "Yeah, I know it's a bit strange," said herself. "But hey," her doppelganger leaned forwards as if to tell her a secret. "There's really no difference between you and me. I'm what you are when you get rid of all the baggage." "How?" Sule reconsidered. "When?" "Right now, if you try hard enough." Sule could feel a warm glow building in her chest. This version of herself, it was her. She could feel it. It was her without the mask, without the shell of despair that had followed her most of her life. She reached out to touch her own arm, running her hand down the sleeve and the heat of the living flesh beneath. It was real. She twined her fingers with her left hand and right hand from different bodies, but the same body. The calluses on her hand were rough, and for the first time in a long time she didn't feel alone. There's an entire universe out there to explore. Don't forget how it feels to look up in the night sky and see all those stars. There's so many stories. We're just a tiny piece of a tremendously large puzzle. Don't give up on it. Not yet." Sule took her doppelganger's hand in hers and formed them into a cup, which she covered with her fingers. There was a tingle, and something glowed so bright that for a moment she could see the bones inside the skin of her hand. "We're what we want to be, you and I." She pulled away her hands, and floating in Sule's palm was a miniature sun. Sule looked up into Sule's eyes, which almost looked like they were glowing in the light of a star. She had always thought they were ugly, but not anymore. Sule laughed, watching the sun. She felt her mind stretching, becoming undone as her copies blended together into a muddied line of vibrant color and shape. She was the sun, her innards churning, burning in the deep, pulling herself with trillions of invisible tendrils along a river of chaos. She saw her others detonate in explosions beneath the fire of sail fleets 1,000,000 strong, and there were emotions, but it was bigger. It was a deepness in the very fabric of her reality that sang and warped in light and the sensation of gravity, caressing her as everclouds rushed across her skin. She was alone, but she was not her memories. She was now, in the now, and it was all and everything. Now, you see, said Ove. Sule woke, blinking as the sunlight streamed through the open window. No, she groaned, stretching. You can't do that. You can't leave me thinking it was all a dream. That's not fair. Ove simply shone, perhaps for a moment a bit brighter. If it was a dream, it was the best dream that Sule had ever had. She closed her eyes in the memory and made a mental note to never forget how the other version of herself had felt. Thank you, whispered Sule. A knock came from the door. Sule, it's Ben. Do you have a minute? Sule jumped to her feet. She cracked the door. Yeah? Ben stood on the other side. His eyes darted down for a moment, and Sule suddenly became very aware that she was in her underwear. She drew her leg back around the door and bit back a laugh as Ben's face became noticeably red. The captain says we're having a meeting. Right now? I mean, no, later, in a few hours. Okay. Ben turned to leave and Sule watched him go. Hey, Ben? He turned around and their eyes locked. For a moment, Sule just stared at him. Those deep brown eyes were so concerned, comforting, so... What was this all of a sudden? She'd never felt like this. Her heart hammered in her chest. Waves of warmth flowed through her, like it had in the dream. And for a moment she felt like she was glowing and pulsing and 1,000 leagues across. She sucked in a breath. No, she shouldn't. Oh, but she really wanted to. Then she opened her mouth. The light's hitting you just right. Just stand there for another 10 minutes. Maybe your pants look nice. Can you dance with me again? Never mind. Sure, said Ben, looking at her with concern. See you. Sule closed the door and leaned her back against it, sliding down to the floor. She was a long way off from that other version of herself. A hawkish woman with harsh features sat at a wide desk, dressed in a white revisionist uniform, steepling her fingers, watching the crew. Guards flanked her right and left, and more at the doors behind them. I am General Itria, said the woman. I am in charge of security for this base, and I understand you've asked to see me, as I understand you are in a certain predicament. That's a fine way to put it, said Reginald. Just dandy, said John. We've investigated your story, said Itria. We have reports of chaos at the Rose, and rumors of demons appearing from thin air, tales of fleeing ships and heretical uprising as news spreads, which coincides with each of your stories. It sounds like we owe you a great deal. Furthermore, we have not seen any signs of conditioning among your people, and no sign of pursuit from the Empire. It seems, good folk, what you say is true. There was silence. However, said General Itria, the gods are known to play convoluted games, and we have not lived 50,000 years outside of Grail's influence in the shadow of the last of the living suns by being trusting. You will not be permitted to leave or access your vessel until we obtain the knowledge from the Alcuor on how he came to know Ove's location, a location that must never be revealed, one that we will protect at any cost. Our attempts to extract the details have so far been slow. "Who'll feed Lola?" asked Rowan. "What?" said the general. "The cat." The general sighed and nodded to a soldier. "It'll be taken care of." "Please," said Felix. "None of this makes any sense if we are Imperials. Why would we bring one of the 9 to you? Go look at it. The brain-dead gods fouled itself on the floor. Why would one do that willingly?" "You will speak," said Itria, leveling her gaze at Felix, "when spoken to." Felix took a swig from his canteen, and Reginald shot him a look. "After the execution," snapped General Itria, "we will come to a decision on your status. Trust is earned. If you attempt to leave or go anywhere without escort, you will join the creature on the cutting block." Chapter 20. The Living Dead. History. It's a funny thing. Someone who never dies is always the writer, an individual with no consequences. They can perform any feat and any atrocity, knowing full well that after a mere 1,000 years, it'll be forgotten. Vicadu wrongs. O'Galdian historian, year 12,311,124. The golden-haired god was dragged onto a raised platform in a field of grass, followed by an entourage of figures dressed in revisionist white. Above the platform, Ove cast the inhabitants of its carapace in a warm glow. There was a crowd gathered. Many were human, some were in between, and many were wholly outer. Floating bags of gas dotted with eyes, some furred or scaled. They were united in their fear of the god, and they waited in awed silence as the speaker, an old man with hard brown eyes and a head of gray curls, stepped up onto the podium. A horned ampliphone was placed in front of him. He looked over the audience and then began to speak. "There are many of you who already know the creature before you now. You can scarcely believe it, and yet we dare to hope that it is true. A god, and not any god, one of the 9, what has been, throughout known time, to be something holy, untouchable, and yet we together have brought one to their knees." He fell quiet, and there was no muttering in the crowd, not even the hint of a whisper. The people looked on, no smiles, no frowns. They were grease-streaked with matted hair, wiry and grim. Not even a mention of us, thought Sule. Samuel had been quiet since Ove, but she could sense him just beneath the surface, simmering. It's probably better that way. "For the first time in over a century, revisionist cells from across Copper Hall are united in their resistance to the houses," continued the man. "Chaos spreads through the realm. Dead gods kill their own. Worlds rise again from the ashes to rebel against their eternal masters. We all sense it. Change is coming, and Grail cannot stop it. Not this time. We have seen what we can build together, outside Grail's influence." He gestured around at the plains. "Soon all will know the freedom of thought. We have gathered to bear witness and spread the word of the execution of the tyrant, the butcher, the traitor to life, the creature that defines the very essence of what all gods represent. It is here, poisoned, weak, defeated. Jezebel Adara. Let us put the name to memory, and then to dust. Today, we kill our gods." A globule of drool dripped from Jezebel's mouth. Her cheeks looked sunken and her eyes bruised and empty. "Everyone's so quiet," whispered Sule to Ben. "They're waiting to see if she can actually be killed," Ben whispered back. "Nobody's ever killed a god. No mortal, that is." General Itria took over the podium. Today we remember. Today we remember that we are not tools to be used. Today we remember who we are and what we can be. We are alive because of your ingenuity, because of your perseverance, because of your will to live a life free from the tyranny of the Empire and the Alcuers, the demons that serve it. The revisionist leaders looked amongst themselves and each other hesitantly. There was a cough. One of the generals hit the switch on the side of the guillotine. The blade fell and the crowd screamed and cried in fear. In the last instant, Jezebel's eyes darted to Sule's. Sule couldn't breathe as the world flowed past in slow motion. The blood pooled on the wood in angry crimson. Jezebel's head rolled, and there was an uproar of shouting, but to her it felt muted. There was a whisper in the air, and Sule followed it, turning numbly to look behind herself. The guard behind her was slack, his head nodding on his chest, and then he looked up and met her gaze, and smiled. Oh no. Then the guard was pushing his way through the crowd, out of sight. Sule, said Ben over the roar of the crowd, forcing his way through after her. But she had no soul. How did she? Sule broke through the crowd and saw the back of the guard disappearing into one of the hatchways buried in the grass. Who was that? Sule? Called Ben, before he followed her as she slipped down the ladder. Sule ran down the corridor, past dim yellow lights, catching sight of a shoulder and then a leg, and then she came to a halt, staring at the body of the guard. His throat had been cut by his own hand, and he watched her with a grin of blood-stained teeth. Then he was dead. Oh, said Ben, coming to a stop behind her. Sule caught sight of a leg as she heard someone sprinting away. She followed the sound, turning the corridor to see a different woman receding back. Hellshat! Sule grabbed the guard's gun. Sule, what is going on? Hissed Ben. There were shouts coming from behind them. It's Jezebel! Sule yelled back, sprinting after the woman. Ben's eyes widened as he realized what she meant. But Magnus said that was impossible. They ran past the body of the woman. It looked like she'd run straight into her own sword, impaling herself. The woman gasped once, and then she was still. There were yells behind them. There was another body, and then another, and each time Sule heard the footfalls. She turned the corner and saw a man running. She took aim with the gun, and then she hesitated and aimed low. She pulled the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand and her ears rang. The man tumbled to the floor and Sule stopped, adrenaline pounding, then walked towards the body, her gun raised. Sule, said Ben, staring at her in shock. He stopped at her side. Is she dead? The man rolled onto his back, grinned savagely and waved with one hand, the other holding a gun that he pressed into his mouth. Wait! Sule cried. His brains exploded against the wall in a mess of gore. Sule looked down at the body in horror. Drop it, said a woman's voice. Now. Sule froze. She knew that voice. The gun clattered to the floor. She turned her eyes to see General Itria flanked by soldiers in the adjoining corridor, their guns leveled at her. Reginald and the rest of the crew skidded to a halt in the corridor behind Sule, breathing heavily. Their own guards closed in behind, their rifles leveled at the crew. Sule! Ben! What did you do? Shouted Reginald. What in the seven hells is going on? Orders, sir! Yelled the soldiers. General Itria smiled, and Sule knew that smile. Her stomach sank. Spies after all, said Itria, who was Jezebel, and she pulled a gun from her belt and leveled it at Sule's face. How many did you kill in your attempt to escape? 2, 3, 5? Itria raised her hand and the soldiers' rifles tensed. Why now? Did the death of your god drive you mad? Did you hope to stop it? Stop me? Did you think it would be so easy? You were fools to even try. Kill the traitors. Sule closed her eyes. Whomp, whomp, Whomp! The general turned, looking behind her as the doors down the corridor slammed shut one by one. Kill them now! Jezebel fired as the doors slammed in front of her and the guards, and then behind the crew. The clang of the bullets impacting metal echoed in the space. They were alone, and then a door hissed open to the left. The corridor beyond was empty. Guess we've overstayed our welcome, said Chorsk. He was clasped to the back of Enar like a backpack, which would have been funny if it had been in any other situation. They beheaded her, said Rowan. But that was her behind the door, wasn't it? Rowan looked at Sule. Yes, said Sule. How? Not even the blood can remain, whispered Sule. Who's controlling the doors? Said Felix. Ove, said Sule. They jogged to the end of the corridor and another door opened for them. Why's Ove helping us? Who told you that? Said Rowan. Help me out here, Sule thought, but Samuel was silent. Ove must have been able to sense the god, said Ben. Right, said Rowan, and Sule felt her eyes boring into the back of her head. What else can Ove sense? They reached the end of the corridor and a door opened for them and they entered one of the transition bulkheads to the outer shell. They drifted down to the door as the latches secured. They peered cautiously into the hall beyond. There were soldiers rushing towards them from the right. Halt! They yelled. A door slammed shut in front of them. Sule could see them through a porthole, gun butts bashing into reinforced glass. Let's go, said Reginald. And so they went. Whomp went the doors. Whomp, whomp, the whomp. Revisionists halted in their tracks as Sule and the crew of the Sophie rushed from corridor to corridor, seeing only the confused faces behind the windows. They ran along the corridor and through the windows they could see the hangar. The Sophie lay on a work carriage at the back of the space, her mass stowed along her hull. There's my old girl, said Reginald. The door to the hangar opened and they entered. At the same time, a hangar door opened across from them, and a disheveled and rather ill-looking Magnus swayed, grabbing hold of a bar for support. You! Yelled Reginald. Technicians throughout the hangar looked up from their work. Hello, said Magnus. The doors seem to have befriended me. I'm glad to see you too. Reginald grabbed Magnus by the collar of his coat and rammed him up against the wall. Did you know Jezebel would escape? Magnus gasped as the air was knocked out of him, but his expression when he looked up changed to one of horror. Reginald's anger quickly turned to one of fear. What? Said Magnus. She jumped, like you said she couldn't. She's the damn general now. That explains why Ove acted so soon, whispered Magnus. The soul and the mind are inextricably linked, but I never thought it could be possible. As a demon would corrupt the soul to corrupt the mind, perhaps the gods could also corrupt the mind to access the soul, like a virus. Jezebel then has found a way to regain what was lost. What are you saying? Said Rowan. How do you know it was Ove? We made a deal, said Magnus, turning his eyes to her. With a son? Yelled Reginald. The technicians behind them fled as they saw Enar and Chorsk making their way across the deck. Yes, said Magnus. What could you have that a son could possibly want? Asked John at Reginald's side. Freedom, said Magnus. The Sophie thrummed to life behind them. The mast extended and the sails unraveled. The docking cradle cracked and split down its center with a boom. The Sophie drifted towards them, and Sule jumped up onto the crates with the others and then leapt onto the gangway as it drifted past. In moments, they were outside of Ove. Are they following? Asked John as they gathered in the pilot house. Not in anything that will catch us, said Ben. The Foulbog? Asked Rowan. Being damn creepy, said Felix as he peered out a viewport. The Foulbog were perched on every surface around the hangar exit, silent as they turned their gazes towards the ship as it drifted past and away from them. They're not watching the ship, thought Sule. She was sure at that moment they were watching her. Did we just doom an entire civilization? Get below, said Reginald to Felix. Burn heavy until we're clear of the heap. I never want to see the color yellow again. The Sophie was swallowed by mustard clouds as the Ove faded from view.